Happy Tuesday to you. Welcome to this great day. It was, 73 out this morning, so it was absolutely beautiful. The rain is starting to dry up. I think it's going to come again on Thursday or Friday, maybe Thursday. But this has been was a beautiful morning. I think it was hot yesterday outside. I was actually working mostly inside yesterday, so I didn't get a chance to go outside in the afternoon, but it looked hot. So when it looks hot, I don't go outside because I'm a wimp. You'd think, that I live in Arizona, grew up in Phoenix, that I'd be okay with the heat. Actually, I'm okay with the heat. That's just, I don't like humidity. It's the weirdest thing. I can take a dry heat I could probably get into an oven and be okay. But when it's heat and humidity, there's something my body can't handle it. So that's why I love, that's why I love Vail, because it typically is a dry heat, and why I really, really why I struggle in other parts of the country that I've visited or lived or things like that. But I do okay, and I do okay here. So I guess that's about it. Housekeeping. We will not meet on Thursday and Friday of this week, so we'll meet yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And then we'll take off Thursday and Friday. As far as birthdays go, there is no birthday today, but there is one birthday tomorrow, and then we have two on Sunday. So that'll be good. We'll talk about those. The cases of COVID seem to be increasing. I just want to talk about this a little bit. If you look at the Arizona Department of Health Services, you can see that it's probably double. Let's see, the lowest point was around June, which is about 500 cases, and now we're at 1,500 cases. This is all of the state of Arizona. So we're about 3 times higher than what it was at its lowest point. A couple things that I understand about this. First of all, that we have better treatments here in Arizona. It has not overwhelmed the hospital system yet. If you've been vaccinated, there is a high probability of one of two things. One is that you probably won't get the virus. And number 2 is if you do get the virus, because you've been vaccinated, it may be less severe. Those two things, apparently 90-something% of the people that are in the hospital right now because of coronavirus that have been brought into the hospital over the last month, 90% of those people are unvaccinated people. There is some percentage of the people who are vaccinated, they're in the hospital. Because remember, this vaccine, while it is very good, it is not 100% protecting you against the virus. What it really requires, apparently, is that a vast number of people would, maybe 75, 80%, 90% of the people in our community would become vaccinated, and then the virus doesn't have paths of transmission. So those people that are not getting vaccinated, and I understand if you don't want to get vaccinated, but what happens is then it provides more pathways for the virus to get through society. And if you are unvaccinated, and if it's less than, say, 50% of the people are vaccinated, I don't know if that's enough to protect you from ultimately getting the virus. And so you might want to say, if you're unvaccinated, you're weighing the potential of getting the virus and dying from it versus the side effects of the vaccination. That's basically what the decision you have to make in your mind. And how much you want to help a community not get, to get to herd immunity. Because I did get vaccinated. I'll tell you my reasoning by getting vaccinated. One is this mRNA technology is the new path forward for these vaccines. So I knew that at some point I would have to get an mRNA vaccination to protect me in the future. And the older I get, the more severe, or the more it makes sense to get vaccinated. And it's probably easier to deal with the side effects from the vaccine when I'm young and healthy than it is 20 years from now when I'm older and not as healthy. And so I said, there is a potential that I could get the vaccine and it could be very bad for me. I mean, we don't know. I mean, some people might have a very severe reaction to the vaccine. I've seen some people have some severe reactions to the vaccine. I don't know if anybody's died, but there probably have been some throughout the country. But I took the vaccine because I knew that probability-wise, that's a better, safer way to go than not get vaccinated and potentially get, coronavirus or future viruses that this vaccine is going to help against. And the other thing is that I know that once we reach herd immunity, that it's like more of the community that I live in are going to be protected. And so because I love my church, because I love the people that I associate with, I take the risk of getting the vaccine because I love other people. And so that's my reason why I took the vaccine. Didn't have to, no law that says I had to, but I just felt compelled to do that because I felt like that was an important thing for me. So I did, but everybody else has to make their own decision. So we got that, we got birthdays. But if we start seeing cases increase to levels, we are at 1,500 cases, which is about 25% of what we saw as the peak from last summer. If this continues to go up and doubles or triples, I could see the governor or other people, the CDC, come up with some much stricter guidelines in masking and all things to try to lower the potential of this thing, rummaging through society. So we'll just have to play that one by ear. All right. So I think what we're going to do is just go ahead and get into today's topic. Today's topic, I've always found very fascinating. And so I think you'll find that this is just a really interesting study today. We are in episode 44 of our study, Exodus, God's Great Rescue. And we just finished the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments given by God to Moses on Sinai. Remember, the people are around the base of Mount Sinai while God is giving Moses these 10 Commandments, or giving the people the 10 Commandments. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens from here. So we're going to go to Exodus chapter 20, and we'll begin reading at verse 18. When the people saw the thunder and the lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled in fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die." I just have to pause right there. So God is speaking the 10 Commandments, and there's thunder and there's lightning and there's trumpets and people see the smoke. And they're like, no, we're afraid of God. Well, we should be afraid of God. At some level, we have to understand that God is a mighty, powerful God. And with the snap of his fingers, he could completely wipe us all out. What is it that my parents used to say? I can make more of you. Have you ever said that or heard that from a parent? Obey me. I can take you out. I can make more of you. And God's the same thing, right? He could make more of us if he wanted to. He certainly could. So being in the presence of God is not the most comfortable thing in the world. Remember when God encountered Moses at the burning bush, God told him, "Take off your sandals. This is holy ground." And I don't think Moses had any problem doing that. So, yes, Lord. Took off his sandals. Whenever you're in the presence of God, it's a holy thing. I think the same thing when Peter caught all the fish because Jesus told him to catch the fish. And then Peter suddenly realizes that this is God. He has control over fish. And it just breaks him. He gets down on his knees and he praises Jesus at that point and follows Jesus at that point. When you come to the conclusion that God exists and God is holy, you have really no choice but to follow him and to follow his commands and decrees. That's just part and parcel of what happens. Now, in our lives, God always leaves a room for doubt, which is so that our faith can increase. If there's a balance between faith and doubt, right? The more God leaves on the table, then the more faith has to elevate to build our faith. If God comes to you without a doubt that I exist, that's a great thing. But then you have to follow him, and then there's really no room for faith because you the more you believe that God exists, the stronger your faith is. The less requirement for a strong faith It goes hand in hand. All right, so we'll continue reading in verse 20. Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning." Now, this is an important verse. We have to remember this. Don't be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you and keep you from sinning. What keeps you from sinning? It's the fear of God. And what keeps us from sinning? It could be the fear of God. I don't try to sin because I love God, but if you don't have that initial love and you know that God exists and he's going to punish you if you sin, then it's the fear of God that keeps you from sinning. But Moses says, don't be afraid. These commandments are here to make you fear God and to keep you from sinning. I don't think the purpose of the commandments are necessarily to mete out punishment on the Israelites. God put the commandments there to make us live in fear of the commandments. When we have laws like, why don't you kill somebody? And it's like, well, I don't kill anybody because I don't really feel like killing anybody. Okay, I understand that. But if you felt like killing somebody, one of the things that might deter you from killing somebody is the fact that if you get caught and it's a severe enough level of crime that you could be put to death. And so that's part of people's thinking. But for the vast majority of it, I mean, for me, I've never killed anybody. So I don't need the commandment, thou shalt not kill. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to kill anybody anyway. But those commandments are pressure in a society to try to live a life that's holy and pleasing to God. We'll keep reading. Verse 21. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. And then the Lord said to Moses, verse 22, "Tell the Israelites this, you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourself gods of silver or gods of gold." So this is, and if you know anything about various religions around the world, there's this propensity, this desire of people to make gods. There's just something comforting about taking something out of our hands and making gods and worshiping those things or making them be representatives of God. But God says, no, don't do that. Don't make any gods. I am your God. I'm the Lord your God. Follow me. No other gods besides me. And by the way, do not make yourself. Now, this is one of the commandments, but don't make for yourself gods of silver or gods of gold. God's repeating this, that we should not make gods of silver or gold. There should not be a physical representation on earth that you worship. Worship me. Don't build something with your own hands and worship this as if you're worshiping me. No, worship me directly. Worship me alone. We continue on. Verse 24. Make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a stone tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, or your private parts may be exposed. So God is saying now it's okay to build an altar, but don't worship the altar. The purpose of the altar is to put the sacrifice on and to burn the sacrifice on the altar. It's a holy place. And it's okay to bring your sacrifices and to feel the presence of God there when the altar is there, but don't worship the altar. Worship me. That's what you can worship. Now, a couple things here. First of all, the stones should not be dressed. I love this. Some of the most beautiful things that I've seen in life are where people take native stones and keep them in their native shape and then, build a fence or a wall or something like that with native stones. I think that is truly beautiful. It shows both the handiwork of man, but it also shows the natural beauty of the world around us. And if you go into Europe and see some of the natural stone buildings that have existed for a long time, there's something uniquely beautiful about it. There's a guy on the north side of Old Spanish Trail. If you've ever driven in those neighborhoods, there's one guy who's purchased landscaping stone kind of in its natural format. And then he's built all these fences and walls around his property and within his property that have that stonework. I just think that is absolutely beautiful. I truly do. And if you have a church that's built out of natural stone, I think that's really, really, really beautiful also. And I think that there's just something about the natural beauty of God's creation that you kind of keep. There used to be, for the very, very longest time, the architectural rule was that if you built something, it had to be as beautiful, or try to be as beautiful as God's natural creation. There's something about the beauty of God's natural creation. If I go into Cienega Creek or whatever, where there's just natural landscaping, natural things, or even on our church property, the undisturbed natural landscape, except for the jumping cholla. I hate jumping cholla, but if you can find a place that's kind of got natural trees and grasses and plants and flowers without jumping cholla, I just find that extremely beautiful. I really, truly do. So God's saying, don't worship me. Worship me alone. Don't worship gods of silver, gods of gold. It's okay to have an altar, but you're going to put your offering on the altar, and I will be there and I will bless you. If you build an altar of stones, don't, shave off the stones and cut them, just make them the natural stones. And if you go up to my altar on steps, and do not go up to my altar on steps, or your private parts may be exposed. So you have to have some sense of modesty also when you build this altar. And now we're going to get into, because all that's interesting, but what's really interesting is that now God's going to give Moses a bunch of laws. And these laws are going to seem rather harsh. You're going to look at these and say, my goodness, God is a very vengeful, punishing God. Couple things to say about this. Just because the law's on the books does not necessarily mean that people were punished by these laws. Because as we'll see as we get later into the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Tanakh, there were ways to avoid punishment in these laws if they were if there was a mild punishment of these laws that you broke. There was a way to offer a sacrifice. There was a way to offer money. There were ways to appease God from the punishment of these laws. The purpose of the laws isn't that God wanted to kill people. The purpose of these laws that God had to put downward pressure on mankind to try to behave. I'm guessing that most Jewish people did not break God's law. Remember, even and there was 613. These 613 laws that are in the Old Testament were put in place to kind of protect mankind from really not breaking the 10 Commandments. It was like a fence or a hedge around God's law that they would put so that you never broke through the hedge and actually broke God's law. Now, people could certainly break the 10 Commandments. They could certainly do things that were not pleasing to God. But God's going to give punishments. He's going to say, these are the laws that I have on the books, and these are the punishment for those laws. But when you read these punishments, understand that, and even if you look in the Old Testament, go back in the Old Testament, like how many people were actually punished? Can you think of anybody in the Old Testament that was actually punished because they broke any of these laws? There were a few, but not a lot. This is in the whole history of the Old Testament recorded in the 39 books of the Old Testament. How many times do you really, really see somebody punished for an Old Testament law? Now, there had to be some because God has to be serious. If God puts a law in place, then there has to be that threat that this could actually happen. But there are lots of ways. Even today, we have laws on the books, but we don't necessarily give everybody the punishment of the law on the books. Sometimes there's extenuating circumstances. Sometimes we can't prove that somebody actually broke the law. And even the laws that are on the books are not necessarily there because we want that to happen. For example, there might be a law in the book, like a policeman might stop me, and if he senses that there's something that he might, further enforce the law, to try to really try to get at whether or not there's a crime committed or something like that. Sometimes the laws are on the books to allow police officers or authorities to go one step further to really investigate if there is a crime. But 99 out of 100 times they might not go that one step further because they don't sense any crime. Sometimes you have to have laws on the books that allow the authorities to go a few steps further to kind of track down crimes. Because nobody can do anything. No police officer, no authority can do anything unless there's a law in the book that allows them to do it, to investigate. And so there is that also. So some of these crimes some of these punishments may seem rather severe, and you just have to understand that the vast majority of the time, probably nobody was ever actually given the punishment for these crimes. There were probably times when they had to, but that was to put downward pressure on the people to keep them in line. Remember, why does God give us the law? God gives us the law so that we can live together. It's God's law is something that if we follow God's law, like if you follow the 613 laws of God, which it's not hard to follow the 613 laws of God. If you follow the 613 laws of God, you will probably live a very, very wonderful, stress-free life. You will grow older with joy because you know that you're following God's law. The problem is that by the time of Jesus, these laws, there were people that felt like they could perfectly follow God's law, and so it didn't matter what else they did. But sometimes you can follow God's law to a T and still be a horrible person. And this is what the Pharisees and Sadducees, this is what Jesus noticed. They were all following God's law, but they were just horrible people. And so Jesus drives the law even deeper to say, you've heard it said, not commit adultery. But I say to you that if you look at someone with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. Or do not commit murder. But I say to you that if you even belittle someone or say raka to someone, or give them little value, that's a form of murder also. Jesus showed, because this is what everybody needs to understand, none of us are perfect. Even though there were people that felt they were following God's 613 laws because those are the ones that were codified. The whole purpose of those laws was to create a people who were loving and caring and compassionate to each other. And by the time of Jesus, they weren't loving and compassionate and caring to. There were some really, really bad people, even though they kept the whole entire law. And so Jesus changed that whole system. He didn't take any of the laws away, but he fulfilled the law. So for us, the purpose of the law is to, first and foremost, help us realize that none of us can follow the law perfectly. That's the mirror part of the law. None of us are perfect. John says this in his epistle, 1 John chapter 1, verse 7. If we say we have no sin and we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. But if we say we have sinned, God's with us. Basically, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And that is the mirror portion of the whole law. We cannot come to the law with arrogance. We have to come to the law with humility. That's one of the purposes of the law, is to make us humble. The other purpose of the law is like the guardrail. Like if we follow these things, then we will probably live a pretty good life. And now there's a third purpose of the law for Christians, which is if you see that you're sinful, if you want to live a life that's pleasing to God, then the law also gives you kind of a guide to what types of things makes God happy. And that's the third use of the law, which is a guide. So the three uses of the law are a mirror, guardrail, and a guide. And that's the purpose of the law. And it might be helpful to think about that as we go through these laws too. They're a mirror to show us our sin. They're a guardrail to keep us on the straight and narrow, but it's also those things that we should do to keep God happy. And don't focus on the punishment. The other thing is that not everybody was punished by these. It may have been never anybody was punished by these. It's quite possible, that nobody was ever punished for breaking one of these laws. Maybe at the time of Jesus there was, but it's quite possible nobody's punished for this. And then also the punishment. This punishment was for people at the base of Mount Sinai. And I think the punishment could potentially change as the society matures and grows. There could be different punishments, different ways of looking at those punishments. All right, so with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. This is Exodus 21. We'll just start reading at the very beginning. Verse 1, "These are the laws you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year he shall go free without paying anything. If he comes alone, he is to go free alone. But if he has his wife when he comes, she is to go with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free." So, now this is a couple things here. First of all, this is not modern day 19th century slavery where they went to Africa and picked up slaves and brought them to the United States to work on plantations. Remember, they didn't have debt back then. They didn't have a way to deal with people who couldn't take care of themselves. And so one of the ways that might happen was that these people might be sold into slavery. Not slavery, but sold into servanthood. Where it's like if you had a person that could not take care of themselves. We actually have on our campus a guy that really can't take care of himself. So we give him food, we tell him what to do. We tell him what he can't do. But 100 years ago or 4,000 years ago, that person might then be purchased and be a servant in a household that he serves for 6 years. Maybe it's to pay off a debt or maybe to pay off a family debt. Who knows what it is. But in the 7th year, that person then goes free without paying anything. So at the end of 7 years, that person is free. And then there was also a thing that said 7 years of 7, all the land and property, everything was returned. So it was called the year of Jubilee. And it's not really clear as to whether or not that was ever followed either. Remember, these are laws in the books, but it doesn't necessarily have to have been followed. If the guy comes with his wife and children, the whole family goes free. But if he comes as a single guy and the master gives him a wife and children, then when he leaves the wife and children with the master. That's the way it was. Chances are he may have been given his freedom, but he may not have left. That is quite possible. If it were me and I had a wife and children, I probably wouldn't leave either. Well, let's go to verse 5. "But if the servant declares, 'I love my master and my wife and children, and I do not want to go free,' then his master must take him before the judges. He shall take him to the door or the doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl, and then he will be a servant for life." So if you wanted to stay, you could stay, but you have to go before the judge, and the judge evaluates the case. And if he decides to stay, then his ear is pierced with an awl, and now he's a servant for the rest of his life. He's always in the service of that household for the rest of his life. This does not necessarily mean that he had a bad life. This just means that what he does in the morning is dictated by other people. Now, the funny thing is that as the more complex our society gets, how many times is your life dictated by other people too? You might have a boss or somebody that tells you when to wake up, when to come into work, what to do at work, when to go home, what work to work on, all that sort of thing. This is part of what we do in our society. We don't have our ears pierced with an awl, but there are many of us that are servants to our job. And we are able to leave that job at some point, but maybe not necessarily. I mean, there's some jobs that you simply can't leave. For example, if you're president of the United States, you can't just pick up your marbles and go home, right? You have to serve for the period of time that you've been, you are basically no better than a Hebrew servant for that period of time because you've basically become a servant to a master. So all of us at some level have been servants to a master. I hope you have, because it teaches you humility and how to live. Oh my goodness, we're going late. All right, so I think we'll end it there. We ended up on chapter 21, verse 6. So we'll pick this up again when we start again tomorrow, because some of these are going to get a little bit more harsh and you're going to scratch your head and wonder about them. So we'll talk about those. So let's go ahead and close in prayer. Gracious God, thank you for the blessings of this day. Watch over us and keep us safe. Thank you for your law, which shows us that we all need you. But fortunately, you've come to us in Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen. All right, so that's it for today. Hope you have a great rest of the day. If you do go outside, stay cool because it is hot out there. And we will get together tomorrow. So God's blessings. We'll see you then. Bye.